Okay, here we go. On the count of 3, 1, 2. Oh, hello there. Hi, I was just about to juggle some rocks over my computer, but that can probably wait. I'll just put them over here for now. I'd rather talk with you. So hi, good afternoon, fellow rockhounds. Thanks for taking some time out of your day to dig deep into geology with us. We're thrilled to launch this new weekly program starting today. This is our very first virtual Rockin pop-up. So thanks for being here. My name is Marisa Gomez. I am the Public Programs Manager at the Santa Cruz Museum of Natural History. And one of my favorite parts of the job is getting to chat with these fellers that I'm going to let in right now. They are dun, 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 Gavin and Graham, the Geology Gents. Hey guys.
How you doing, Margarita?
Good. Thanks so much for being here. I'm so happy and excited to talk with you guys about rocks today.
Thank you so much for having us. We're excited to talk.
So really quickly, tell me both, Graham, where are you streaming in live from today?
I am streaming in. So right behind us, we have the terraces of Santa Cruz. Of course, we're not actually flying up in the air, but we're trying to, today we'll be talking about some of the rocks around Santa Cruz. And we thought there's no better place to have in our virtual streaming space than the sea cliffs and terraces and pocket beaches right around Santa Cruz.
There you go. Yeah. And Gavin, where are you streaming in from?
I am also in
Yeah, it looks like you guys are at the exact same spot in space and time.
Same spot, and also physically in Santa Cruz.
Okay, so I'm also curious if you can share with us and share with everyone who's joining us today a little bit about the collective entity that is the Geology Gents, that partnership. And it is a partnership because I've known you both for about 2 years now. You've been doing monthly pop-ups at the museum, and I think I've seen each of you as individuals without the other one around, like maybe twice in all the time. So can you share a little bit about like who you both are and the Geology Gents?
Graham, I could have you start off first if you want.
Yeah. So I am a geologist. I'm a student studying for my PhD at UC Santa Cruz in the Earth and Planetary Sciences department. I will spoil for you that Gavin is doing the same. We started grad school together and we've been lab mates and close friends from the start, although we didn't know each other before starting our studies together. But yeah, we both studied geology. I'm very interested in glaciers and the solar system and how the planets first formed, and I use radioactive elements and the isotopes of those radioactive elements to measure time in those. Gavin, I'll let you fill in anything I missed.
Well, I will say that, as Marisa alluded to, we do everything together. We do pretty much similar projects, both thinking about time in rocks, but and finding the age of rocks, to be more specific. And so I'm also interested in glaciology and specifically Antarctic geology. So that's my sort of specialty under the guise of geochronology, or finding the age of rocks.
Awesome. Cool. Well, we're excited for what you've planned for us today. You have a whole thing ready to go that we're going to dive into. But before we do that, I just want to make sure that everyone at home knows the plan. So I'm going to be trying to monitor the comments over here. And so if you have a question that you would like to ask Gavin and Graham about maybe what they're talking about during the presentation, feel free to put it in there, and I will do my best to barrel on in and interrupt their carefully planned program and interrupt them with whatever it is that you guys want to talk about, geologically related. So feel free to put your questions in the comments. And also, you should be able to add pictures. If you can't add pictures there, you can also, because I don't know, we've been having great luck with Facebook programming, so sometimes it doesn't go as planned. So if your submissions of pictures don't work there, you can email events at santacruzmuseum.org, and I'll check there to see if we've got any questions that are actual images there. But also try here, hopefully it works out, if you do have a picture you'd like to share of a rock that you'd like identified, or also a, sorry, this is noise, or also maybe like a phenomena that you've seen that you want to share a picture of, but you can also describe your questions there. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Gavin and Graham. Take it away.
Thank you very much, Marisa. I'm going to share my screen here. We have a little slideshow prepared for you all. All right, Graham, what are we talking about today?
Today, we are going to talk about the geologic formations of Santa Cruz. So a formation is, well, let's just dive right in and let's tell what a formation is. Gavin?
So a formation is a certain amount of rock that has similar properties. It's got to be similar to the rocks around it. And when I say properties, I'm talking about rock type, grain size, or some shared history, some depositional shared history. And we'll get into that a little bit more specifically later. And so, Graham, what's the point of formations? Why do we put them?
Yeah, so geologists, like a lot of natural scientists, we like to be able to take a look at the natural world around us and make sense of it by describing parts of it and putting it into categories, or categories are at least one way of us helping to describe it. So by identifying formations and saying this rock is like this rock, so we'll call them the same rock, but they're different from this other rock, we just use these, the idea of a formation, to identify and relate different rocks in different locations to one another. So oftentimes when we think of formations, we're putting these up on maps, just like this map in front of us.
Yeah, and so it makes sense that for a formation to be a formation, it's got to be large enough to show on a map so that we can designate it on a geologic map and make it distinct over large areas.
That's right. And so to make them show up on the map, geologists are often using different colors to sort of map them out and put different places, just like we might show the states in the US in different colors on the map. We're just sort of looking at where things are and how they all fit together.
That's cool.
Kevin,
yeah.
We talked about a couple things here, a few things here about how we tell, say, what belongs to a formation and what belongs to a different formation. So rock type is one of those things. So what do we mean when we say rock types?
Great question, Graham. Let's give everybody a little bit of a refresher. These are the 3 rock types that geologists really like to classify rocks in. And so the first one we have here, this is lava. It looks like something you might find in Hawaii. And this is the first type of rock. We call it an igneous rock. And that is a rock that cooled from a melted or molten rock. And so 2 examples of an igneous rock you might find are granite. If you go to Yosemite National Park, all the white rock there is granite. Also, you might find it on your countertops. And another igneous rock that is this dark black rock here, all the rock in Hawaii, is called basalt. So these are 2 of the main fundamental types of igneous rocks on Earth.
Whew. And those start hot, very, very hot. But there's other types of rocks that start cool, and those are sedimentary rocks. Those form when you take a bigger rock and you break it down into smaller pieces, which we call sediments. And those smaller pieces of rock, they end up in one place, they get cemented together, and that makes it a sedimentary rock. And so things like sandstone, and even things like limestone, a sort of, the same stuff that chalk is made out of, this sort of white, really fine, not even very gritty. It's basically chalk. But now, so we started with a hot rock and then we went to a cool rock, but what might happen if we were to take some cold rock and then start to heat it up again, but we don't get it hot enough to turn it into lava?
That's right. The most mysterious type of rock in my mind, called the metamorphic rock. And so, as Graham said, when you take a rock, either an igneous rock or a sedimentary rock, and you heat it really hot and you put it deep inside the earth so it gets pressurized, you sometimes even add water, this type of rock is called a metamorphic rock. It changes the rock, but it doesn't melt it. And so some of the highlights of the metamorphic rock world are marble, which you can find up in UCSC's campus. The quarries there are marble quarries, or slate, which was originally a sedimentary rock, but it was pressurized, so all the grains got closer together, and it forms a crunchy rock.
Yeah, and that slate is pretty familiar. That's what chalkboards used to be made out of. So it got so squeezed that you get all these nice flat layers. But all right, enough about rock types. What other things do we look to relate one type of rock to another, G?
Good question. So we said grain size. And so grain size is something that we often think about in sedimentary rocks. And so because most of the rocks in Santa Cruz are sedimentary, this is going to be something that we really talk about for the rest of today. And so when I say grain size, Graham mentioned the sediments that make up sedimentary rocks, the pieces of broken rock. But us geologists like to classify things a little better than that. And so when we take a sedimentary rock, we classify it by the size of the grains that are inside of it. And so if you have, say, a sandstone, the grains will be sand size. They are made up of a bunch of sand grains. And so a sandstone, compared to other sedimentary rocks, has large pore spaces, like we see here. Whereas if you made a sedimentary rock out of a bunch of mud, the grain sizes are obviously smaller in mud than they are in sand. And so clay or silt-sized grains, which are found in mud, will make a mudstone, and they'll have much smaller pore spaces in between each grain.
And when we say pore, we mean pore with an E, P-O-R-E, and those are all the little spaces in between the hard bits in there. So you'll see that those sand grains, they've got a lot more space in them. We say that those are bigger pores.
That's right. That's right.
Cool.
And now I just have a question about that. Is that something that you can see with your like naked eye? If you've got a rock in front of you, like me looking at this right now, am I able to tell the difference between the grain size just looking at it with my naked eye from this one right here, or do I need like a tool?
In some cases, you totally can. So when you've got a sand-sized rock, and we'll actually talk about a few sandstones in a little bit, it looks just like the sand you find at the beach. So you can actually see the spaces in between some of those sand particles in the sandstone. Once you start getting to siltstones and mudstones, those will get too small, and then we would need like a microscope or a little magnifying glass to really suss those out.
That's right. That's right. So we've got some background on formations. What about the formations in Santa Cruz? Oh, sorry, I was ahead of myself. Excuse me. So before we talk about the formations in Santa Cruz, let's talk about deposition. And so when we have sediments, we have sedimentary rocks. The environment where those sediments are deposited is really important to what the rock is going to look like and what sediments are available for those rocks. And so here we have a nice beach in Santa Cruz. And we have a little schematic here on the right. So all of the grains, all of the sediments that are deposited near the beach will oftentimes be sand sized. That should be pretty obvious to people because you go to the beach, you play in the sand. However, if you were to swim a few miles out offshore, or maybe take a boat, you would find a bunch of sediment that are much smaller in size. And so when we see sandstones, we know those are beach deposits. When we see mudstones, those are oftentimes deep water deposits, because once the sediment gets out far into the ocean, all of the sand is deposited out and you're just left with the really small clays in suspension.
Wait. Are you telling me that the ocean, the bottom of the ocean, is not all sand?
Very good question. Very good question, Graham. It looked like you had an answer to that. Do you want to say?
Oh yeah. I was just gonna say, you better believe it, Marisa. It's because just like we see in this picture here, and in our little drawing off to the side, as you get closer to the shore, we've got waves, and waves are the big workhorses of the ocean, and they move sediment all over the ocean. They're super powerful. That's why they can hold people up to surf on them. That's why they wear away and break down sea cliffs. So those waves are really good at lifting and picking up dirt. And so there's an experiment you can even do at home if you wanted to just think about the way you need energy to move sediments around. If you were to take a little basin of water, I wouldn't recommend using glass because we're going to drop rocks into it. But if you take a little piece of gravel, you take a handful of sand, and then a handful of like real kind of muddy, fine, soft dirt, and you drop each of them in, that gravel will drop right to the bottom. The sand will go a bit more slowly, and then that mud will sit and sort of float around in that water for days to weeks before it settles down. And that just goes to show that like you need a lot of energy to keep that sand up, but that mud, that'll just float right out to sea and settle off far, far away from land where there's no more waves.
That's right. So yeah, when you get to deep water deposits, you oftentimes get mud on the bottom of the ocean rather than sand. That's exactly right.
My mind is blown. I thank you.
All right, Gavin, I'm tired of learning about how we form rocks and tell them apart from each other. Let's get to the good stuff.
You're so right. We got to take this a little closer to home. Okay. Here is what I thought was coming before we talked about deposition. Formations of Santa Cruz. All right, Graham, this is a beautiful map. I think geologic maps are beautiful. Not an unbiased opinion. But okay, we have a bunch of different colors here. Santa Cruz Harbor is in here. So the museum is right around here. So all these different colors, they're different formations, right?
That's right.
And so let's jump in. What's the first formation?
Okay, so the first formation is the Purissima Formation. So here, now we're going to be glad that we started thinking about sand versus clay, right? Sand is that gritty stuff we can feel in our hand. It feels like sandpaper. So the Purissima Formation is mostly a sandstone, and it gets a little bit yellowish gray in some parts where it's finer, but the stuff that really stands out is this blue-gray sand. And the Purissima Formation, you can find it out around right by Seabright Beach. You can find it over by Lighthouse Point. And this stuff is this pretty coarse sandstone. It formed really close to shore in a beach-like and near-shore environment. And so there's also lots of fossils mixed up in there. Just like we find shells on the beach, there are shells mixed into here too. Lots of clam-like fossils, or as we say in the biz, bivalves, shelled little critters. And so this is a lot of material here. It's up to 3,000 feet thick, and it was deposited over 3 million years ago, between about 3 and 7 million years ago.
That's right. And so I used the term a little bit loosely when I said first formation. This is the first formation we're talking about today, and it's also the youngest formation we're talking about today. So the Purissima Formation is going to be laid atop the other 2 or 3 formations we'll talk about, because it's the youngest rocks laid on top. And so, yeah, you had mentioned Seabright Beach. I really like to go to New Brighton as well to find this formation. You go up to the cliff faces there, and there's just these beautiful gray sandstones coming off the wall, and they're just the coolest clam fossils in there. So it's like as Graham had mentioned, a gray sandstone with some really like bright white fossils in there. So a really cool one. And then up here we have that schematic highlighted where this is a close to the beach deposit. So 3 to 7 million years ago, Santa Cruz must have been a beach-like setting, similar to what we see today.
Interesting. Okay. But does that mean that Santa Cruz has just always been, this whole area has always been beach? It's always just been sand and surf all the way back in time?
Very good question, Graham. And so there is a really easy way for us geologists to tell that. Well, what is the rock record telling us? What do the rocks look like? Are they all sandstones? And the answer to that is no, they're not all sandstones. So the next oldest or the formation that lies below the Purissima is called the Santa Cruz Mudstone. And so this is a yellowish mud. As we had mentioned earlier, this will have smaller grain sizes than the Purissima Formation. Here we have a picture of Año Nuevo with a Geology Gent for scale. This is Graham here. And so, as we said, this is going to be formed offshore. We know that this is an offshore deposit. It must have been in around 400 to 600 feet of water in order to get these really fine muds that are deposited. So the answer to the question is no. 7 to 9 million years ago, Santa Cruz was under more water than today.
Awesome. But okay, so does that mean if we keep going further back in time, do we keep going deeper?
We go deeper, but we do not go deeper in water. We actually bounce around. We go from mudstone to sandstone to mudstone. So there was a cyclicity here in these Santa Cruz rocks. It has to do with the sea level, and it also has to do with the rocks being pushed up. That's a conversation for a later date. But this next formation, the next oldest rock in Santa Cruz, the next oldest formation is the Santa Margarita sandstone. That comes 10 to 12 million years ago. Graham, do you want to tell me what this weird looking animal it is you have here?
So the Santa Margarita sandstone, this is a fossil hunter's dream. And a lot of folks are familiar with the sand hills around the area and love to go to those looking for all sorts of things from fossil sand dollars, bits of seals, shark teeth. You even find dolphins, sea cows that are related to manatees. And my personal favorite, the Demostylia. This is basically like a hippopotamus that used to live in North America 10 million years ago. I think, and of course this isn't a real picture, it's an artist, an artist drawing of it, but I think they're rather fetching beasts.
Well, I, for one, am glad I don't run into these on the beach these days.
Me too, actually.
So yeah, this is a really, really interesting formation as well. I really like the fossils in there. And so the three we just covered are the main ones we find in Santa Cruz, but there are others that are found in the area that are also interesting. So one we were going to talk about is the Monterey Formation, found down close to Monterey, its namesake, right, Graham?
That's right. But we don't see it up around Santa Cruz too much. It's underneath all the rocks there. And the Monterey Formation is actually, it extends really far deep beneath the ground. And so a lot of the places, if you ever travel around California and you start and see oil derricks, which there's that little picture on there of that arm that goes up and down. Sometimes you see those on the side of the road. They're pumping oil and they're trying to pump it out of the Monterey Formation. And that's because when the Monterey Formation, when those bits of mud were falling down, there was lots of plankton falling down there with it. So these were really healthy oceans that had a lot of critters living in them, and they lived and they, ate food and soaked up sunlight and photosynthesized, and then they sank down and got caught up in the muds. And as they got buried and heated deep underground, they turned into oil. And so you can see in this little picture of the Monterey Formation, there are these darker bands. There's another little picture there that's full of black rock mixed in there. That's all these hydrocarbons, these oil-like sludge that's mixing around in the rock.
Interesting. So we have a nice little back and forth here between sandy beach formations like the Purissima and muddy formations like the Monterey and the Santa Cruz mudstone. And so the Monterey must be a deep water deposit. And so deep water deposits are really where you find the oil. And that's because that's where you have these big blooms of critters like plankton that die. And as Graham said, collect at the bottom, go under a lot of pressure as they're buried. And eventually you get oil mixed in these rocks here. Pretty interesting.
Very interesting.
So where would I go?
We actually have a question for you all about this, if I may interject. This one is from Felicia, and she's asking, what is the difference between diatomaceous earth and oil? Why did some plankton become one and some become the other?
That is an interesting question. I will be honest, it's at the edges, the periphery of my understanding, because petroleum geology is a whole different beast. But so diatoms are a specific type of critter. They form a silica-rich shell. And so diatomaceous earth is where you get really high silica muds, sort of like cherts you think of. That's how, this is sort of how you get chert layers. Whereas the critters that make oil, are they different critters, Graham?
Well, I think a big thing here is that diatomaceous earth, limestones are also coming from another type of critter that's falling out and sinking down.
Yeah.
Whether you get oil and whether you get just the shells of those critters, I think it often has to do with how much of the body you preserve. In the case of diatomaceous earth, you're just keeping those skeletons. So all the soft, as we call them, organic bits, the fleshy parts of those critters, if those are decaying away and don't get buried deep down, you're not going to get oil. But if you do, if they're getting buried really quickly and there's lots of mud falling on top of them and there's lots of organic matter that can decay away in there, that's what's going to give you oil. So another great place to form oil or other good oil forming environments, or that will eventually turn into oil, are swamps, where you get lots of plants and mucky stuff that's getting built up there. But
so it's about the fact that the decomposition of the organisms happened in such a way that all of the organism is within that sediment, as opposed to maybe there being enough time for the shell to remain and the rest of it to go away. And if the shell remains, then it's that like calcium carbonate is like the more yeah,
something like that.
And so also there's a pore space story to this. And so oil, oftentimes you need to collect this organic matter in these very porous or permeable layers. And oftentimes you get the best oil deposits where you have a porous and permeable layer capped and by a impermeable layer. So it basically traps the oil in there. So oil can move through the pore spaces until it hits a place that it gets stuck. And so the Monterey Formation is really good at that because it's got these permeable muds, but some lenses, some little layers of impermeable sand.
Nice. All right. So I think we are wrapping up our time here. So for folks who are interested in learning more about these rocks, there are some great places that you can go to check them out. We'll leave them up here for you to see. But for the Santa Margarita sandstone, to do some great fossil hunting, there's the Sand Hills at Bonnie Doon, and I've got my screen in the way here, at the Ecological Reserve, and then Henry Cowell through the Graham Hill entrance. The Santa Cruz Mudstone, you can find that at Natural Bridges and a lot of places along the western parts of Westcliff. And then the Purissima is going to be at, like we mentioned, at Lighthouse Point, Seabright Beach, Capitola, and New Brighton.
That sounds great, Graham. And so just a plug for next week. Today we talked about the formations, and next week we're going to talk about our toolkit. What do geologists bring both physically? What tools do we bring out to the field to help us break rocks and look at them? And what things do we think about to identify rocks and minerals? And then how can you yourself develop these tools and bring them out to when you look at rocks? And so find out next week when we reconvene here.
Yeah, I'm going to stop sharing your screen now and just say, so thanks everyone for joining us. Does anyone have out there have any questions that you want to ask Gavin and Graham? You can put it in the comments. And in general, these events are going to continue to follow these different topics. So like Gavin was saying, we have something special for you planned next week, but also this is just about like hanging out and talking about rocks and being in a geologic headspace for a little while. And so whatever y'all want to talk about, feel free. So if you have, a question about local Santa Cruz geology, go ahead. But also if you, have a question about geology in general or something you want to share. And if you have pictures that you want to share with us over the course of the week that we can bring up next week, you can put them in the comments here in the Facebook event page for the virtual Rockin' pop-up, or again, you can send an email to events@santacruzmuseum.org. We may have another email we'll use in the future, but that'll be a little teaser, something special coming your way. We do have a question that came in, guys, from Liz. It says, is there an iNaturalist equivalent site for geology? Is that even a thing? So for those of you out there, Gavin and Graham, do you know about iNaturalist?
I actually don't.
Yeah,
No.
okay, because you got, yeah, so you're hyper focused on your rock world, but there's a lot of, to natural history than just rocks. So there are also people out there who are interested in bugs and birds and plants, if you believe it. And so there's a wonderful app that people use and database that people use called iNaturalist, and I recommend to everyone out there watching, if you've not explored it yet, please do. But you can take pictures of things you observe and share an observation of it out there. Their algorithm will suggest what it might be, and you kind of categorize it by like, well, this is just a plant, that's all I know, or like, I know that this is a primrose, and you can go from there, and people can help you identify what you see. And it's also a way of us getting a snapshot of biodiversity. So is there anything like that, like a database of people to be able to like submit rocks that they found, ask questions, get feedback from others, or maybe also just like better understand what it is they're looking at that point where they are right then and there?
I'm not aware of an app that exists. No, I don't think
we can do some research and have that be perhaps an incentive to tune in next week, and we'll see what we can dig up.
I have one. I don't know how appropriate it is for me to share this, but I'm gonna share with you guys what this one's called, Rocked. And so this is what, right when I open up, it shows me that. And I can go to a map, and it'll show me, probably shouldn't share it like exactly where I am, but it'll show me, I can like scroll around and it'll show me, a geologic map. And then if I click on something, like maybe I'm really curious, what is like this green color up here, I'll click on it and it'll give me information about that. And you can do it, like I'm looking at places near here, but I can zoom it way out and it'll show me a different part of the country, the world. So that's the one I know of. We can chat more about it later, Gavin and Graham.
Yeah, I also know if you're just looking to identify like minerals you might have found, it's a little bit technical, but there's a website, mindat.org, that's pretty good for looking up and researching minerals.
Cool.
Yeah.
And then we also have someone who's interested in chatting with y'all about, they say, if Gavin and Graham have any contacts who deal in Cretaceous marine fossils of California, I'd love to chat with them, as they have an unusual find from NorCal. So this is someone who's like, they want to maybe talk about a particular fossil. So how do you guys feel about fossils?
Love fossils, don't understand them very well. You give me radioactive isotopes, and I know a thing or two there, but fossils are a little bit over my head.
A more relatable statement has never been said. What about you, Gavin?
I would agree with that. I am a fossil novice. I really can appreciate them, but I don't know too much about them. But we do have friends who do, so we could think about talking offline about this.
Yeah, and also just if you have any, like if you have fossil questions in addition to kind of rock questions, feel free to put those out there as well on here, but also on the various places that I mentioned before, because the museum also has a lot of friends in paleontology and places. So we can, if the three of us can't answer your question, or we've got others who might. So please never hesitate to share. And I don't know if there's any other questions out there, but thanks, guys. I guess I want to leave with a question for you all. What is your favorite Santa Cruz outcropping?
Ooh, great question. Gavin, I'll let you take this first.
Oh, okay. I think that it has to be one that I had mentioned in the chat here. The Purissima sandstone in New Brighton Beach is really cool. So
yeah, I don't. If you in the comments, if you want to share if you've been there and if you've noticed any cool fossils that you've found, there. I think a lot of times people don't think that they're finding fossils when they're at the beach. Like I've asked people, have you ever found a fossil? And they say no. And then I asked, like, have you ever been to a beach in Capitola? Because if so, then you probably have. I have one here that is of that formation. Yeah, very kind of coarse and filled with shells. This makes it a fossil. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's a good one. I dig it. Gavin, Graham, what about you?
Ooh, my favorite. I think my favorite is down at the very end of where Swift Street hits Westcliff. There is a little spot down there. You need to make sure you go at low tide so you're playing it safe. But there's an awesome little shelf where Santa Cruz mudstone crops out there. And if you go look up on the side of the walls there, you can see a lot of younger sands that are just a few 100,000 years old. And then there are the sort of iconic toilet bowls of Westcliff, where there are these big domes of harder rock that were these old methane seeps millions of years ago. And it's just there's so much great geology going on there. A lot of it even I don't understand, but you can just feel the earth history there.
Maybe we can we have 1 week devoted to that spot, because I could just go on and on. That's my favorite outcropping too. It's my favorite place to watch shorebirds and to read and to tide pool and to look at just like a lot of wild rock things happening. Mm-hmm. So I agree. Great. Well, I think that about does it for us. We've gone a little over our prescribed time, but we are just so excited to be able to do this with you every single week. I just can't believe it. So very lucky. So thanks for giving us your time, Gavin and Graham, Geology Gents. And again, to everyone watching, please share your ID, questions with us throughout the week. Any questions you have throughout the week, we're going to be right back here on Facebook next week, Wednesday at 3 to talk about Gavin and Graham's toolkit. You guys have any last parting words you want to share?
Oh, just thanks for having us on. This is great.
Yeah, we appreciate it, Marisa. This is fun.
Awesome. Okay, so we'll see you guys next week. Thanks for joining us, everyone at home.